I'd like to have the panel introduce themselves. These are some very interesting people, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion with them and with you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Doreen Mattingly. I am a professor and chair of Women's Studies at San Diego State.
Hi, everyone. My name is Edda Manriquez, and I am the founder and CEO of LEFUFF Underground International.
Hi, my name is Blackwell-Rivas. I'm a second-year graduate student in the master's program of Women's Studies at San Diego State.
So I'd like to begin with asking you all a little bit about your reaction to the documentary and to see what you'd like to say, and then maybe we'll open it out a little bit to everybody. So who would like to start? Doreen?
I thought I would like to show it in my class.
I think this would be very good for one of
we
the
can do
classes.
that.
I thought a lot of it was interesting, the way in which it had, it covered so much territory. You know, it really covered a lot of territory, and the kind of visual elements that it brought into it, I was really impressed with those. I thought that the tension between the young women and the older feminists was a little artificial, because the older women aren't representative of their generation. Obviously, they're feminist academics, and so they've thought about this a lot. If you had collected, you know, if you had just sampled older women, they might say pretty random things too. And so, but I was also interested in, but that said, it is a real tension between older women who were part of a movement and then younger women who don't feel so connected to it. I guess I can maybe start with that.
Yeah, I agree as well. I mean, it's even interesting the way they're framed in the film, where the women who are talking about feminism are, you know, obviously have books behind them, right. and the young women are all framed in kind of a outside urban setting, slow motion, kind of, you know, really having to do with social media, phones always in their hands. So it is interesting the way they're framed. And I mean, I think the film is trying to kind of educate, or wanting to educate young women, because it starts with all the girls not knowing, not girls, young women, shouldn't call them girls, kind of talking about they don't know what feminism is, and at the end they kind of include like a pause for dramatic effect. We're like, you know what, I think I know what feminism is now. So I think that's very interesting, and I think it does touch upon a lot of points. So yeah.
Well, speaking for the younger generation, I mean, I think it's interesting that a lot of people my age, well, I'm 23, a lot of people my age don't necessarily identify with the word feminism or call themselves feminist, but when you ask them about feminist ideals or different politics that deal with feminism, they're, you know, all for it. And I think that a lot of the aversion is toward the word more than the actual political views. So I think it's really interesting that the question of the word didn't delve deeper than, you know, what does it mean to you? Because, you know, a certain word can mean something, but you understand it different based on how you grew up, or, you know, the different things that have happened to you throughout your life based on, you know, a feminist or an anti-feminist, yeah?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how they propose and go through some of the history and keep going back and forth over certain things. Because, Doreen, when you teach history in your class, you teach the 70s and everything, what do you start with?
Well, so I'm teaching a class now called Sex, Power, and Politics, and the first half of the class is about the women's movement in the U.S. in the 60s and 70s, and then I'm just jumping to what's happening right now, and the kind of question of the class is whether or not what is happening now in terms of battles over justice, and is it a whole new historical moment and a whole new historical transition in struggles for gender justice and racial justice, and what's the kind of historical record going to tell us that's going to help us make sense of what's happening now. And so I begin that story in the late 60s, because feminism, I mean, I find it better to talk to young people talking about it as gender justice, because there's already a lot of investment and thought about social justice. And so it's saying social justice in terms of gender, and that it's related to racial justice and related to economic justice. And I find sometimes that's more helpful to just get them past that term and get them to think about ways that justice is connected. So, I usually start somewhere, depending on how I'm telling the story, 1965, 1968, and take it forward from there, because so much happened so quickly in that time, and you can tell by telling the history of that time, you can introduce students to so many incredibly powerful ideas that are powerful still, and that are helpful to them. And I sometimes I find introducing people to very transformative ideas that really challenge power in the context of, like, it was another time and place. They're a little bit more open-minded to it, and they can consider it fully, and then they'll say, hey, that applies today. I'm like, okay. So that's usually when I begin.
And Edda, you've been running this film festival for a while. What is coming through in some of the themes that you're seeing? Because I would assume much of what you're getting is being made by younger filmmakers.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that we receive is more focused on fourth wave feminism, so kind of using the millennial technologies to explore that idea of feminism. So a lot of the work we're getting is more about the discourse that's happening in those social media spaces, and a lot of the conflict as well between what's considered fourth wave feminism and third wave feminism, because there aren't as many scholars present for fourth wave feminism. It is a new thing in that it's currently happening. You don't have a lot of texts are being written, so people kind of disregard it as being a movement taking place, specifically online. But I think the Women's March that happened in March. I think that's a great testament of how effective it is, because it did reach at a global scale, because so many people were communicating via social media. And so those are a lot of the perspectives that we get, is kind of exploring these different ideals of feminism as it evolves in more subtle and more aggressive ways. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the looking at social media is very important. They talk about it here too. But we see very interesting reactions, a lot of silencing at times, where you'll get responses on Facebook to a comment which are actually extremely aggressive. In fact, had this person said this to you, they could have been arrested for both the sexual aggression and the physical violence that is perpetuated through the anonymity, to some extent, of social media. So you're able to reach out, but at the same time it reaches back. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely negative and positives, it reaches more people, but at the same time it allows people to hide and troll, so to speak, and say such horrible things to people.
Yeah, yeah. So this is something that I think it's interesting to watch too, because as they speak about it here, there is this kind of rise, this feeling of things are coming back to some extent, but they're coming back within a social media context. We always thought the future would be well integrated and a little bit more equitable. Well, I guess there's still Star Trek, right? And we could watch that. Yeah, but I think social media needs it's still in its infancy as we work through that, I think, yeah. And what's happening in your department for you and your colleagues who are in the graduate division? What are you guys working on?
We're working on a lot of different things. So me specifically, I'm looking at undergrads and their levels of political engagement. So how do you understand the world right now? Are you angry? Are you do you not care? Where are you getting your news? And then also looking at how students engage with protest. So like you mentioned, the Women's March, did you participate? Do you consider that even a protest? So going back to kind of what I was saying about words, like how do you engage with this word protest, and then how does that influence whether or not you do or do not go? And then also in our cohort, we have people doing work with food justice. So one of my cohort members is working on bringing veganism into people of color's their mainframe.
Yeah, I mean, I want to piggyback off the idea of just the representation of the younger generation, whether or not they're present. And I think right now, specifically from a media point of view, as a filmmaker, it's a really exciting time because you see a lot of women speaking up about, wage inequality. The whole Harvey Weinstein thing is really hot in the media right now. People are finally speaking up. And I think within the last, 2 or 3 years, I've been noticing more people talking about, feminism in the media sphere specifically. Now, whether or not there's equality in intersexualism, that's another thing. But it's still something that is being talked about. And I think before I never viewed it in the media, or at least I was not aware of it. Maybe I'm more aware now. But I think that's definitely, we're seeing more of that. So I think there is being more of a discourse presented in the current generation that is maybe overlooked or overshadowed because of, however we perceive the different generations of feminism to operate. So,
does protest extend to a share or a retweet? Is that a valid form of protest? And these are things that I kind of think about. It's like you can use your click, and then you can also use your body. So I think that trying to find a medium between the two, or just bringing people out of that sphere and into where they are with their information is also something that's becoming more and more important. So there's goods and bads to internet for me, but I think it's just something that needs to be worked on. Like you said, we're in our infancy of the digital era.
Exactly. So I'd like to open it up a little bit to people out here.
I look at a lot of issues and social justice and all the things that you were speaking about before. We see so much of it on social media. But I think, and I've read in other genres recently about what we're kind of calling lazy activism. And I think the film actually mentioned that to some degree. And I try to impress it with friends. It's okay to like my post, but liking my post does not do what calling a senator or writing a letter or physically showing up, as you said. And I just think that the digital presence gives a lot of people a false sense of, hey, I did something because I like to post today.
The conversations that I've had with students is, sometimes, I fear the consequence of being out in a space, or I don't want to be arrested, or, all the different negative things that are associated with bringing your body and bringing your just presence to a space. So there's some validation in that, you are getting a message across if you are sharing a post, or, if you do carry it into conversation with someone in the coffee shop. So it's a start. So I don't want to completely invalidate that. But I do agree, we do need to get people out and calling, or, just signing petitions and doing different things that will actually lead toward a more, aggressive form of change.
Everyone is glued to their cell phone or some sort of electronic device, and we have a lot of what we call or I think they're called social warriors, right? Who they go on social media and they open up a discourse of something they disagree with, and that's their form of protest without really engaging with others, or really just kind of talking at another sphere of the internet, But along with that, I think the world is shifting in the way things are perceived, and there is a lot of negative to it, but there also is a lot of positive. And I think, it's something it's hard to tell because technology just kind of rapidly took off within the last couple of years, to the point that now a 5-year-old has an iPhone, and that's really scary, I think as adults, kind of looking at what that means, our disconnect to the younger generation as we grow older. But at the same time, I think it's even though there's a lot of information that's being put out there, especially on the internet, which is where we go to every day, it's like a second living room in a way. I think you can still grab bits and pieces of useful information that do transform the way you see things, and maybe kind of push for more of a progressive way of thinking.
Boy, I think so many different things. I don't know where to begin. I think, you know, as the director of a women's studies department, Donald Trump is the gift that keeps on giving. You know, in a way that a sort of wake-up call about the need for protest and a kind of reflection on irresponsible tweeting and so many social ills that people are needing to respond to and think about in a different way. I think that women are not... So I think that feminism is and understanding gender and gender as a form of power is an achieved position. It's not something that women naturally have. During the feminist movement, they were also opposed. The ERA did not pass because of women's activism, right? And so there's nothing inherently about women that means that they understand gender justice. That's an achieved position. And I think that one way that sexism works is that it divides women. And I think it's very different from racism in this respect, right? In that competition among women for male attention is kind of normalized in terms of properly performing being female. And women don't vote for other women. That's not a voting pattern. And it's very different if you're in a community of color or a marginalized community in some way where you feel an alliance and you live in a neighborhood with people like you and you're likely to vote for somebody like you. So in a way, it's not surprising. Women rarely cross party lines to vote for women. And white people are disproportionately Republican. But I do think that the Women's March and the volume of it and kind of the volume of women-led protest subsequent to that, for me, is fascinating. It's fascinating. I mean, women who I've known for a long time, a woman who, I'm involved in politics. When I first met her, she was the president of a political women's club, and she's like, but we don't care about women's issues. We're just women who are involved in politics. I'm like, okay. And now, you know, she's talking about, like, if women don't have control over their reproductive rights, that's slavery. And I'm like, oh, right on, okay.
What's interesting is that I went ahead and kind of wanted to educate myself more on the Italian, you know, feminist movement because I didn't know a lot about it. And what I came to see is that, you know, there's a long history of kind of tradition as an oppressive force towards women, you know, having to be... you know, the white, like as they were saying in the film, you're either a maternal body or you're a sexual body, you know, and so a lot of times you aren't really like given the opportunity to make choices politically because they're made for you. You know, the right now we have the issue of the laws. One of the laws being passed is, you know, birth control for women. Companies could opt out of it. Is that our choice? Did we allow that? Of course not. But most people are pushed towards kind of choosing something that they think is what is the accepted. People who you're watching on television, who you're watching in ads, they're being paid millions of dollars to really frame like what you think of what you should be, you know? They all say you should be independent, you know, and then they're really selling like a scarf or something. This is the independent woman, you know? She dresses this way. And so you have to remember that these are thoughts that are being fed to us. And it's very strategic because we live in a generation where also, you know, the economy is being shifted towards younger people. Each year, younger people, they all have credit cards. And so you're shaping that thought from a very young age. And that's very different when you talk to someone face to face because suddenly that person has generated a different thought process, you know, and the discourses they're having are perhaps, you know, they're real. And what you're seeing in the news, that's not real either. It's all framed from a perspective because it's all sensationalism. It's all meant to see, you know, to frame something big. You know, they only frame negative things on television.
Transmission. And I guess it's incumbent upon all of us because we do have multiple stories, and Donald Trump has given us some very interesting narratives, to take it upon ourselves to be responsible for the storytelling.
Vibra nell'aria che scorre, poi scende.